Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're wrestling with a philosophy that's really popular right now, but maybe also carries, well, a lot of baggage in terms of misconceptions. We're talking about Stoicism.
It's definitely having a moment, isn't it? And, because some of its tools seem so immediately useful for modern life, for stress and anxiety,
Right.
it often gets boiled down, maybe oversimplified into things like, just suppress your emotions or, suck it up.
Exactly. You mentioned you're into Stoicism, and people jump to, oh, the stiff upper lip brigade, or
Mm.
so you want to be a robot who just accepts everything bad. It's
Mhm.
this caricature, really, that ignores centuries of pretty deep thought.
Absolutely.
So our mission today, our deep dive, is to tackle the three biggest, most common criticisms head on. And we're going to use the original Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, to see what they actually said,
Yeah, let's try and set the record straight. We want to show that the real goal, the ultimate aim, is what they called eudaimonia.
which means,
Usually translated as, well, a flourishing life, a life that flows smoothly. It's about happiness, really, but a deep kind of happiness. And these criticisms, they often just misunderstand the tools, the methods for the final goal.
okay, so let's lay out those criticisms we're going to tackle. What are the big three we always hear?
Okay, first, the idea that Stoicism wants you to just shut down all your feelings. Become an emotional iceberg, basically, incapable of feeling anything much good or bad.
Right, the unfeeling robot critique.
Second, the idea that it's all grim and joyless, focusing on hardship, thinking about death all the time. It sounds miserable, doesn't it? Ascetic, maybe?
The memento mori, making life bleak, yeah.
And third, the political or ethical angle.
Yeah.
That it leads to being passive, just withdrawing from the world. If only internal virtue matters, why bother trying to change things, fight injustice, or get involved in messy politics? Quietism, essentially.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. Let's take our time and start with that first one, the big one. The emotional iceberg. Is Stoicism really about just forcing yourself not to feel anything, like becoming a block of stone?
Yeah, this is probably the most persistent myth, and getting it right means understanding a really critical Stoic distinction. They weren't against all feelings or affective responses, not at all.
Okay.
They made a sharp difference between what they called first movements, our sort of initial automatic physical reactions, and the pathe, the destructive passions they really warned against.
Okay, first movements. Help me understand that. Like,
Yeah.
if a loud noise makes me jump or I feel a sudden shock, is that a first movement?
Exactly that. The Stoics were, pretty sharp observers of how humans work. They knew we have these instant physiological reactions. Your heart might race, you might gasp, feel a flush of heat, maybe a fleeting thought of anger or fear.
Right, the involuntary stuff.
Precisely. Seneca is very clear about this. These are involuntary. They happen to you physically. They aren't yet the emotions or passions in the dangerous sense. They're like precognitive responses. Your reason hasn't stamped its approval on them yet.
So the goal isn't to stop that initial jolt, which sounds impossible anyway, but to stop the mental process that turns that jolt into, say, lasting rage or crippling anxiety.
You've got it. It's about what happens next. So what defines a pathos, a passion, in the Stoic view? It's an extreme, usually negative, emotion-thinking, overwhelming terror, blinding anger, consuming greed, and crucially, it's defined as being based on a false opinion or judgment.
A false judgment.
Yes, it comes from buying into a wrong idea about what's happened. That's the core of it. Reason gets compromised. So if you feel that first flash of annoyance, but you immediately pause, assess, and stay rational, Seneca would say you haven't actually succumbed to the passion of anger yet.
I remember Seneca talking about being enslaved to passions, living under a tyrant, he called it.
And that's such a powerful metaphor, isn't it? Because if you're ruled by anger or fear, you've lost your inner freedom, your peace of mind. Your mind isn't yours anymore. It's controlled by this inaccurate, often exaggerated belief about reality. The emotion is like a runaway train started by a faulty signal.
And they seemed particularly focused on anger, didn't they? Seneca wrote a whole book on it, the ira. Why is anger singled out so much?
He calls it a temporary form of madness, or as one scholar put it, a little mental illness.
Wow.
Because for Seneca, anger is the passion that most swiftly and completely takes over our rational mind. He gives these really vivid descriptions, the blood boiling, face contorting, voice straining, heart pounding. Once you give your assent, once you agree with the false judgment that fuels the anger, the physical takeover is immediate and overwhelming.
It sounds like you lose control very quickly.
He compares it to being pushed off a cliff. Once you're falling, you can't just decide to stop midair. The momentum takes over. The damage is done, or at least the course is set until it plays out.
So, the crucial moment, the only place to intervene, is right at the very beginning, before you make that judgment. This must be where the famous Stoic pause comes in.
Absolutely fundamental. They stress this need to create a gap, a moment of reflection between the event and your judgment about it. If you just react instantly, impulsively, you're basically handing the keys over to the passion.
Epictetus had some challenging things to say about this, didn't he? About provocation.
He did. He says if someone manages to provoke you, you have to realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. It's not just the external thing. It's your internal agreement with the idea that it's provocative.
That's tough to swallow sometimes. We feel like the external insult is the problem. But he's saying the insult itself is neutral until I decide it's harmful.
Pretty much, yes. His advice is, someone insults you, pause, ask yourself, is what they said true? If yes, well, they've actually done you a favor by pointing out a flaw you can work on. Thank them, internally at least. Is it false? Then they are mistaken. They've only harmed their own character by being wrong or malicious. In either case, the external words haven't actually harmed you, your core self, your reason. The real harm only comes if you let it trigger the internal storm of anger or distress. The damage is self-inflicted through a bad judgment.
Okay, but hang on. Does this mean Stoics think we shouldn't feel sadness or grief? I mean, if a parent loses a child, are they supposed to just not grieve? That sounds inhuman.
And that's right at the heart of the emotional iceberg criticism, but it's based on confusing apatheia with apathy.
Apathy meaning not caring.
Right. Apatheia for the Stoics didn't mean being unfeeling. It meant being free from the pathe, the disturbing, irrational passions. They absolutely accepted, even valued rational and appropriate effective responses.
Yeah.
They called these eupatheia literally good feelings.
Good feelings. Okay, so what counts as a good feeling for a Stoic?
These are feelings based on true, accurate, rational judgments. They're the healthy counterparts to the passions. So this includes things like a sense of awe or reverence, maybe rational caution instead of blind terror, certain kinds of love that aren't possessive or needy.
Okay.
And very importantly, it includes joy or kara, a deep, stable kind of joy. So the wise person isn't unfeeling at all. They just don't get thrown around by emotions rooted in false beliefs. They feel things appropriate to reality.
So the goal is rational calm, maybe even rational joy, not just emptiness. That makes sense. And it leads us perfectly into the second big criticism, the grim life. If they're always thinking about hardship, contemplating death, focusing on what can go wrong, isn't that just a recipe for a miserable, joyless existence? Where's the fun?
Right. It sounds like a real downer, doesn't it? But again, the critics are mistaking the exercises for the end point, thinking about loss or death. These are tools. They aren't the goal itself.
And the goal is?
The goal is still eudaimonia, that flourishing, happy, smoothly flowing life we mentioned. And that comes from living with arta, virtue, or excellence of character.
So joy isn't just absent. It's actually connected to virtue.
Deeply connected. Joy, Chara, is described as a rational, good feeling that arises from living virtuously. For the perfect Stoic sage, admittedly an ideal, this joy is supposed to be constant because their judgments are always aligned with reality.
Okay, but what about for the rest of us, the learners?
For us progressors, the text suggests the joy might be more intermittent, but still, and I quote loosely here, significantly greater than the joy we knew before. It's the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing you're acting with integrity, with reason, no matter what's happening externally.
That really shifts the focus inward, doesn't it? Which links to Seneca's advice about wealth, which actually seems to push against the idea that Stoicism is purely ascetic or anti-pleasure.
Exactly. Seneca says, you want to be rich. Don't try to add to your possessions. Instead, subtract from your desires.
Get rid of wanting things.
Yeah, find contentment with what you have. He talks about finding great pleasure in simple things, basic food, clean water, sunlight. This isn't about punishing yourself. It's about making your happiness depend on things that are easily available and secure, not on luxuries that can be taken away.
Okay, so that reframes asceticism. It's not self-denial for its own sake. It's resilience training.
Yeah.
Building inner wealth.
That's a great way to put it. And that brings us to the practice people find most, well, morbid, negative visualization. Thinking about losing things.
Right, dwelling on the bad stuff.
Right.
How is that helpful?
Critics see it as being negative. The Stoics saw it as a powerful psychological tool. Why think about potentially losing your health, your job, even your loved ones? Two main reasons.
Okay.
First, paradoxically, it increases your appreciation for what you have right now. You stop taking things for granted. It's a form of gratitude practice, really.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Seeing the value by imagining its absence.
Exactly. And second, and this is crucial for resilience, it helps prevent excessive attachment. If you've mentally rehearsed the possibility of loss, accepting that these external things are temporary, maybe just on loan from fortune, then when misfortune does strike, the shock is lessened. You're better prepared.
So it's like preemptive emotional shock absorption.
You could say that. We get blindsided by bad events because we assume things will always stay the same. Stoics say, no, anticipate change, anticipate loss, it's part of nature. Seneca even advised his friend Lucilius to practice poverty sometimes.
Practice poverty. Wow.
He literally said, set aside a few days, eat the plainest food, wear rough clothes, live very simply, and then ask yourself honestly, is this the condition I was so afraid of?
That's quite a confronting exercise.
But the point isn't the suffering. The point is the realization, hey, I can handle this. It's not as terrifying as my imagination made it out to be. It frees you from the fear of poverty, which is often worse than poverty itself. It builds that robustness.
Okay, I see the logic. If you know you can handle the basics, you're less terrified of losing the extras.
Precisely. It makes you less vulnerable to threats or misfortune.
Which brings us to the ultimate negative visualization, contemplating death. Memento mori. How does thinking about death lead to freedom and joy instead of just gloom and doom?
For the Stoics, contemplating death wasn't morbid, it was liberating. Seneca wrote that someone who has truly learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave.
Unlearned how to be a slave. How so?
Because if you accept death as natural, inevitable, and not inherently evil, then the ultimate threat that others, tyrants, fate, whatever can hold over you loses its power. What's the worst they can do? Kill you. You've already faced that possibility and accepted it as part of the deal of being human. You're beyond their reach, in a sense.
It removes the ultimate leverage.
Exactly. And they normalize it further by emphasizing its impartiality. Death comes to everyone, emperor, slave, rich, poor. It's a law of nature, like gravity. Since it's universal and unavoidable, why have a specific personal fear of it? Seneca argues it either leads to annihilation, which ends suffering, or potentially a transition to something else. Neither, he says, is truly harmful. The fear comes from our false judgments about it.
Okay, so we've chipped away at the cold and grim critiques. Stoicism aims for rational tranquility, a robust kind of joy built on resilience. Now, the third big one, maybe the most ethically challenging, the passive philosopher. If my happiness only depends on my inner virtue, my judgments, why should I bother getting involved in the messy external world? Why fight injustice? Why engage in politics? Doesn't it just encourage you to retreat and say, well, it's all external anyway?
This is a really important critique, and it hits at the core of Stoic ethics, but it fundamentally misunderstands their view of human nature and duty. Far from advocating withdrawal, the Stoics actually had a very optimistic view of humans as inherently rational and, crucially, social animals.
Social animals. Yeah. So being good means being sociable.
In a deep sense, yes. For them, a good human being is one who acts sociably, contributing to the community. To choose to be deliberately antisocial or purely self-interested was seen as acting. Well, less than fully human. It was denying your own nature.
So engagement isn't just optional, it's baked into what it means to be human, according to them.
Exactly. Our reason itself tells us we need to engage. This comes out in the concept of oikeiosis.
Oikeiosis. What's that?
It's often translated as appropriation or familiarization. It's the idea, most famously illustrated by the philosopher Hierocles, of expanding circles of concern. Imagine yourself at the center. The first circle is you, then your immediate family, then your extended family, your neighbors, your local community, your fellow citizens.
Okay, expanding outwards.
Until the final, largest circle embraces all of humankind. We have a natural affinity and a duty towards all these circles.
That sounds incredibly modern, like the basis for cosmopolitanism, global citizenship.
It absolutely is. The Stoics are credited with developing this idea that our primary allegiance isn't just to our city or tribe, but to the cosmos, the world community. So if virtue requires you to act justly, and justice inherently involves how you treat others in these circles, then taking principled action becomes a moral requirement. You can't be virtuous in isolation.
But the pushback might be, okay, fine, I need to act, but don't I need anger to fuel that action? How can you fight injustice without righteous indignation? Don't you need that fire?
And that's where the Stoics draw a firm line. They argue forcefully. No, you don't need anger. In fact, anger is counterproductive to achieving justice.
Counterproductive? How?
Remember Seneca's On Anger? He wasn't just talking about personal spats. He was advising Nero on how to rule. He insists you can and should act from calmer motives, a sense of duty, loyalty, a rational commitment to justice. Anger, he says, is that temporary madness. It clouds judgment, leads to excessive punishment, harms the person feeling it, and ultimately undermines the goal. Justice requires clarity and reason, not fury.
And we have a pretty powerful real-world example of this with Marcus Aurelius, don't we? After the revolt of Cassius.
A perfect example. His top general, Avidius Cassius, rebels in 175 AD, tries to take the empire. It's a huge threat. Cassius gets killed by his own men eventually. Now, traditional Roman practice would demand brutal reprisals against his family, his supporters.
Right, make an example.
But Marcus does the opposite. He shows remarkable clemency. He pardons Cassius's children, ensures their property isn't confiscated. He writes to the Senate urging them not to execute any senators involved, to let the exiled return.
He chose mercy over vengeance, even when he had every political reason and precedent to choose vengeance.
Exactly. His actions were driven by, arguably, a Stoic sense of justice and the good of the state, not personal anger or revenge. He preserved his own virtue, acted rationally, and probably stabilized the empire more effectively than a bloodbath would have. It was decisive action, but guided by reason, not passion.
Okay, that deals with the why act question. But there's still that massive philosophical elephant in the room, fate. If the Stoics believed everything is predetermined by this cosmic order, by fate or nature, how can my actions truly matter? If the outcome is already set, isn't trying just futile? Doesn't that lead to passivity?
Ah, yes, the famous lazy argument against determinism. And the Stoics were very aware of this and worked hard to refute it. They absolutely did not preach quietism in the face of fate. Their solution was subtle but clever.
How do they square that circle? Action and fate.
They argued that fate doesn't just happen to us like some external force pushing us around. Instead, fate works through us. Our choices, our actions, our deliberations, these are all part of the causal chain of fate itself.
So we're like cogs in the machine of fate. Our actions are necessary for the fated outcome to occur.
That's a good way to think about it. Chrysippus used the analogy of a cylinder. You can push it, but whether it rolls depends on its own nature, being cylindrical. Similarly, external events happen, but how things unfold depends also on our character and our choices, which are part of the grander unfolding. We are causes at play that contribute to the outcome.
So if it's fated I'll get a job, I still have to apply and do the interview. The applying and interviewing are part of the fated path to getting the job.
Exactly. You can't just sit back and say, if it's fated, it'll happen. Your action is the necessary link in the chain. Choosing not to act is also an action contributing to a different fated outcome. To make this clearer, they used another analogy, Antipater's analogy of the archer. This one really gets to the heart of where happiness lies.
The archer analogy.
Right.
Tell us about that. How does that connect action, fate, and happiness?
Okay, imagine an archer. What is the archer's goal? According to Antipater, the Stoic goal isn't ultimately hitting the target.
It's not. Isn't that the point of archery?
Not for finding happiness, no. The archer's true goal, the thing they control, is to do everything in their power to shoot well, to use the correct stance, to aim carefully, to release the string smoothly. That is the virtuous action, the effort, the intention.
Okay, the quality of the attempt.
Right. Now, can the archer control a sudden gust of wind? Or the target moving slightly? Or the arrow hitting an unseen twig?
No, of course not. That's external, unpredictable. That's fate.
Precisely. That's fate or the external factors. So Stoic happiness is tied only to the part the archer controls. The quality of their action, the doing the best they can with skill and intention, whether the arrow hits the bullseye or not is ultimately an indifferent.
Wow. Okay, that separates effort from outcome completely.
Right.
My happiness depends on trying my best, virtuously, regardless of whether I succeed in the worldly sense.
Exactly. If you tie your happiness to hitting the target, the outcome, you're setting yourself up for constant frustration because outcomes are not fully in your control. But if you tie your happiness to the quality of your attempt, your virtuous effort, then nothing external, no gust of wind, no moving target can take that internal satisfaction away. You did your best. That's the Stoic win.
And you just have to look at the lives of Seneca or Marcus Aurelius' advisor to an emperor leading armies on the frontier. They weren't sitting passively waiting for fate. They were acting intensely.
Their lives are the strongest argument against the passive philosopher critique. They were deeply engaged.
Right, we've covered the external world critiques now. Let's turn inward to maybe the most philosophical challenge. Criticism for the unattainable ideal. People point to the Stoic sage, the wise person who is perfectly virtuous, and say, come on, that's impossible. Nobody's perfect. Plus, didn't they say virtue is all or nothing? You're either a sage or a fool, no in between. How can a practical philosophy be based on an ideal nobody can reach?
That's a very fair point, and it's something the Stoics themselves wrestled with. They did tend to present the sage as a theoretical ideal, perhaps vanishingly rare in reality. And yes, technically, in the strictest early Stoic view, virtue was seen as absolute, like being underwater. It doesn't matter if you're an inch below the surface or a mile, you're still drowning.
Okay, so how does that work for normal people trying to use this philosophy? If it's pass-fail, how can you make progress?
This is where the practical application comes in, focusing on the learner, the person making progress, the prokopton. The value isn't just in reaching the destination, sagehood, but in the journey itself. Progress is possible and immensely valuable, even if the endpoint is perfection.
But how do you measure progress if virtue is absolute?
Through understanding and applying their value system, particularly concerning what they called indifference.
Indifference, right. Things that aren't virtue or vice.
Exactly. The Stoics said there's only one true good, virtue or excellent character, and only one true bad, vice or poor character. Everything else, health, illness, wealth, poverty, reputation, obscurity, life, death, is technically indifferent.
Okay, but that sounds counterintuitive again. Surely health is better than illness.
And Zeno, the founder, realized this sounded absurd, saying health doesn't matter, so he refined it. Within the category of indifference, there are preferred indifference, progmena, and dispreferred ones.
Preferred indifference.
Yes, things like health, wealth, good reputation, skills, education. These things have value. They are naturally preferable. They help us live in accordance with nature. They make a virtuous life easier to practice. We should make rational efforts to obtain them.
Oh, okay. So we prefer health, but it's not morally good.
Precisely. It doesn't make you a better person in the moral sense. The crucial thing, the absolute dividing line for the Stoic learner is this. You must never, ever compromise your character, the only true good, in order to gain a preferred indifference.
Don't trade your integrity for money or fame.
Or even for health in some extreme cases. The person who lies, cheats, betrays, or acts cowardly to get rich or famous, or even just to stay comfortable, they've made a terrible bargain. They've traded the only thing that truly matters for something that has only conditional external value. That's the mistake the learner tries to avoid more and more consistently. Progress is measured by how well you maintain that boundary.
Okay, that makes progress tangible. It's about making fewer compromises, making better choices regarding these indifference. But how do you actually build that strength? It sounds hard.
It is hard. The Stoics saw living well as a skill, maybe the skill that takes a lifetime to learn. And the way you learn it is through constant practice, specifically aimed at building good habits or ethos.
Habits?
Yes. Musonius Rufus, who taught Epictetus, his teaching was almost entirely focused on practical training to correct bad habits and instill good ones. It's about the daily grind, the small choices.
So it's less about sudden enlightenment and more about consistent effort, like behavioral therapy almost.
Very much like that. Epictetus is constantly telling his students to set a contrary habit against their destructive impulses. Got a tendency towards anger, practice patience deliberately, tend to overindulge, practice moderation, even in tiny things like how much water you drink or how quickly you eat.
Focusing on the mundane.
Because the mundane is where life happens. Each small victory, choosing patience over irritation, moderation over excess, courage over avoidance, strengthens the muscle of virtue. You build the habit of good judgment through repetition.
That feels much more achievable than instantly becoming a sage. It's about the process, the small wins.
Exactly. And we don't just have to take the ancient Stoics' word for it that this process works. We actually have some modern evidence suggesting it does.
Oh, like studies.
Yeah, there's been a fascinating social science experiment running for about a decade now called Stoic Week.
Stoic Week, what's that?
Researchers, often associated with Exeter University in the UK, created this online program. Thousands of people worldwide sign up for 1 week and commit to practicing core Stoic exercises, daily things, like focusing on the dichotomy of control, doing some negative visualization, reflecting on their actions morning and evening.
What happens?
The results, gathered through questionnaires before and after, have been consistently positive and pretty remarkable.
What kind of results?
Participants regularly report significant improvements in their sense of well-being. For example, looking at some aggregated data, people reported things like, on average, a 9% increase in positive emotions, an 11% decrease in negative emotions.
In just 1 week.
In just 1 week of focused practice, and perhaps most relevant to this idea of progress, they reported around a 14% average improvement in overall life satisfaction.
14% increase in life satisfaction in 7 days. That's actually huge.
No, it really is.
Yeah.
And it strongly suggests that even engaging with these practices relatively briefly makes a tangible, measurable difference. It powerfully counters that idea that the philosophy is just some impossible ideal. Progress is real, and it feels good.
It certainly makes the philosophy seem much more like a practical toolkit for improving your actual life, rather than just abstract theorizing.
Which is exactly what Epictetus always said it was. He called his school a hospital for souls, a place to get practical treatment for the things that ail us internally.
Yeah, this has been incredibly clarifying. We've really dived deep into these major criticisms. To recap, Stoicism isn't about emotional suppression, but achieving rational tranquility, apatheia. It's not a grim philosophy, but one aimed at a deep, resilient form of joy, eudaimonia. And it's definitely not about passive retreat, but demands engaged, principled action in the world based on our social nature and duty.
And if you look closely, the root of almost all these misunderstandings seems to come back to a confusion about one core Stoic principle, the dichotomy of control.
Right. What's in our control versus what's not.
Exactly. We control our judgments, our intentions, our choices, our character. That's our sphere. We don't control external things, our body's health ultimately, our reputation, other people's actions, wealth, world events, the final outcomes of our efforts.
And whenever we pin our happiness, our eudaimonia, on those things outside our control,
we've basically guaranteed ourselves frustration, anxiety, and disappointment. We've handed over our inner peace to things we can't command. It's like betting your life savings on a coin toss.
Seneca really captured that need for self-reliance, didn't he? Saying external things, good or bad, don't really elevate or depress the wise person.
He did. He aimed to rely as much as possible on yourself and to derive all delight from within yourself, because that's the only source of delight you truly own and control.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to maybe chew on this week. Building on Seneca. If external things, outcomes, praise, possessions, even health to some extent, are ultimately indifference, if they don't hold the key to your flourishing, then what is the one thing outside your direct control that you are currently allowing to most disturb your inner peace? Is it chasing an outcome you can't guarantee? Is it relying on someone else's opinion? Or maybe it's just holding on to a judgment about a situation, a judgment that isn't quite true, that you haven't paused to correct. The ongoing task, the Stoic challenge, remains: rely on yourself.